Chapter 5. The boot heel on the serpent's head. From the song. His boot heel hit hard on the serpent's head. The curse cried out, the lie fell dead. Death lost its crown, hell's kingdom fled, and the Son of Man stormed out, rising from the dead. I need to tell you about the serpent, not because I want to, because you need to understand who was under that heel and why it mattered that it was his heel that came down on him. I never saw the serpent clearly. None of us did. He wasn't the kind of being that held a shape the way you or I would hold a shape. He was more like a presence, something you felt before you saw, something that moved at the edges of things and preferred it that way. He had been operating from the shadows since the garden, and even here, in the realm of the dead, where he should have had home field advantage, he stayed out of direct view. But he was there. He was always there. He was the one behind the lies I told you about, the low hum, the constant whisper, the background frequency of accusation that ran underneath everything in that place. He didn't need to show himself. His voice was enough. His voice had been enough to wreck everything back in the garden, and he'd been riding that strategy ever since. Stay hidden. Keep talking. Let the lie do the work. It had worked for a long time. He was the one who told Eve that God was holding out on her. He was the one who whispered to Cain that his brother's acceptance was an insult. He was the one who corrupted the earth so thoroughly before the flood that God had to start over with one family in a boat. He was the one who put it in Pharaoh's mind to drown the Hebrew babies. He was the one who stood behind every idol, every false god, every pagan altar that tried to drag Israel away from the promise. He was the one who put the noose in Judas's hand. Every move from the garden to the cross, the serpent was trying to stop the seed of the woman from crushing his head. 4,000 years of strategy, 4,000 years of scheming, corrupting, accusing, destroying, and deceiving. 4,000 years of fighting against 5 words that God had spoken to his face in the garden. He shall crush your head. 5 words. That's all it took to seal his fate. And he knew it. He'd always known it. Every generation that passed was one generation closer to the man he couldn't stop. Every prophet who spoke was another voice confirming what the serpent already knew. His time was running out. And here's the thing that I think will wreck you once you see it. The serpent thought the cross was his victory. Think about it. The Son of God, the promised seed, the one every prophecy pointed to, the man that all of heaven and all of earth had been waiting for, was hanging on a cross, dead. The body that held the fullness of God was limp, pierced, drained of blood, wrapped in a burial cloth, and laid in a borrowed grave. If you were the serpent and you had spent 4,000 years trying to kill the promise, Friday afternoon looked like the finish line. He bruised his heel. That was the serpent's one shot. The part of the prophecy that belonged to him. You shall bruise his heel. And he took it. He bruised it with nails and thorns and a spear and the full weight of human cruelty carried out on a Roman cross. He threw everything he had at the heel of the seed of the woman, and for a few hours between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning, it looked like it worked. But the serpent made the oldest mistake in the book. He confused a bruise with a kill. The cross was not the serpent's victory. The cross was his trap. The very thing he thought would end the promise was the thing that fulfilled it. The death of Jesus didn't stop God's plan. It was God's plan. Every drop of blood, every nail, every lash, every thorn, all of it was the price being paid for everything the serpent was trying to prevent. The serpent was so busy bruising the heel that he didn't see the heel rising above his head. I didn't understand any of this when it was happening. I was on the quiet side of the divide, feeling the tremors, hearing the darkness scream, watching the man with the keys walk toward us. I didn't have the full picture until later, but now that I've seen it, now that I know what was happening on the cross while we were feeling the ground shake, I can tell you what God did was the most breathtaking thing I've ever witnessed in any realm of existence. He used the serpent's best move against him. The serpent killed the body. God raised the man. The serpent bruised the heel. God crushed the head. The serpent thought death was the end. God walked through death and turned it into a hallway. What the serpent meant for destruction, God had designed from the foundation of the world to be the instrument of total, permanent, irreversible redemption. And now the man was standing in the serpent's territory with the serpent's key, and the serpent had nowhere to go. I saw the moment. I can't tell you exactly what it looked like, but I can tell you what it felt like. It felt like the ground giving way. Not under us, under him, under the serpent, under every lie he'd ever told and every accusation he'd ever made and every scheme he'd ever run. The foundation of his entire kingdom, 4,000 years of darkness, deception, and death, cracked and buckled and gave way under the weight of one footstep. His boot heel hit hard on the serpent's head. Not a tap, not a step, a stomp. Deliberate, forceful, and final. The kind of impact that doesn't just wound, it ends. The serpent who had whispered his way through history, who had slithered behind thrones and altars and armies, who had convinced a third of the angels and the first of the humans to follow him into ruin. That serpent felt the full weight of the Son of God come down on his skull. The curse cried out. I heard it. Everyone heard it. The curse, the thing that had entered the world through Adam's sin, the thing that brought death and thorns and sweat and sorrow and separation from God. The curse had a voice, and it screamed. Not in triumph, not in defiance, in death. The curse was dying. The thing that had poisoned every generation since the garden, that had made the ground hard and the labor painful and the grave inevitable, was being crushed under the same heel that was crushing the serpent. And I understood it in that moment, standing there watching it happen, why Jesus wore a crown of thorns. The thorns were the curse. When the ground was cursed because of Adam in Genesis 3, he said, "Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you." The thorns were a signature of the curse, the mark, the proof that something had gone wrong in the world, and it touched everything, even the dirt. And when the soldiers twisted those thorns into a crown and pressed them into the skull of the Son of God, they didn't know what they were doing. They thought they were mocking him. They thought they were making a joke, a fake crown for a fake king. But he wore the curse on his head so he could crush it under his heel. That's the kind of thing that makes you go quiet for a long time. The lie fell dead. Not lies plural, the lie, the original, the first one. The one the serpent told in the garden, "You will not surely die." That was the lie that started everything. 4 words that contradicted God and introduced death into a deathless world. Every lie after that, every false religion, every twisted truth, every whispered accusation was a descendant of that first lie. Kill the root and you kill the tree. The boot heel killed the root. When the man, Jesus, crushed the serpent's head, the original lie died with him. Not just the words of it, the power of it. The lie had carried authority for 4,000 years, the authority of a deceiver who had never been fully answered. Oh, he'd been resisted. He'd been rebuked. He'd been pushed back by prophets and priests and faithful men and women who chose to believe God instead of the whisper. But he had never been answered, not ultimately, not finally, not in the way that stripped the lie of its power permanently, until the heel came down. "You will not surely die," the serpent had said. "I am the resurrection and the life," the man Jesus answered. That's not a rebuttal. That's an extinction event. Death lost its crown. I watched it happen. Death, the king of that realm, the power that had ruled unchallenged, lost its authority. Not gradually, not through a long campaign or a negotiated surrender, in a moment. In the time it took for one heel to hit one head, the crown that death had worn, the authority it had claimed, the dominion it had exercised over every human being ever born, fell off and shattered on the ground. Paul would later write about this moment. "O death, where is your sting? O Hades, where is your victory?" I can tell you where they went. They went under the boot heel of the Son of Man. That's where they went, and they're not coming back. Hell's kingdom fled. Not fought, fled. There's a difference. Fighting implies a contest. Fighting implies 2 sides with a chance. This was not a fight. This was a rout. This was an army that had held its ground for millennia, only to discover that its walls were made of paper, its weapons of lies, and the man standing before them of something entirely different, something they couldn't match, couldn't counter, and couldn't survive. The principalities, the powers, the rulers of darkness, the spiritual forces of wickedness that had operated across every realm, visible and invisible, since the fall, all of them fled. Not to regroup, not to fight another day, to get away from the heel. I later learned what Paul wrote about this moment in his letter to the Colossians. Having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. A public spectacle. He didn't defeat them in secret. He didn't win a quiet, private victory behind closed doors. He stripped them of their weapons, their authority, and their dignity, and he did it in front of everyone, in front of the faithful dead, in front of the powers of darkness, in front of every created being in every realm. This was not a negotiation. This was a parade. The kind that happens when a king returns from war and drags the defeated enemy through the streets for everyone to see. That's what the man did to the serpent and every power that served him. And then after the gates were broken and the locks were shattered and the lies were silenced and the serpent was crushed and the curse was dead and death had lost its crown and hell's kingdom fled, the Son of Man stormed out, rising from the dead. He didn't walk out. He didn't slip out. He didn't escape. He stormed out, the way a king exits a conquering city, the way a general walks off a battlefield. He never had any doubt about winning, with authority, with finality, with the keys of death and hell hanging from his side like trophies that belonged to him before the foundation of the world. And we were right behind him, all of us, every soul that had ever waited on the quiet side of the divide, every patriarch, every prophet, every unnamed faithful man and woman who had lived and died believing that one day God would finish what he started. We followed the man through death and out the other side. And the song says, "And the Son of Man stormed out, rising from the dead." But I need you to hear the title, the Son of Man. That's the name Jesus used for himself more than any other. Not Son of God, though he was. Not Messiah, though he was that too. Son of Man. The title from Daniel's vision. One like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, given dominion and glory and a kingdom that would never be destroyed. He used that title for a reason. He wanted everyone to know, from the highest angel to the lowest demon, that the one doing this was a man, born of a woman, the seed that was promised in the garden, not a spirit, not a force, not an idea, a man, God in human flesh, walking through death in a human body, crushing the serpent with a human heel, and rising from the grave in the same human body that had been nailed to the cross. The Son of Man, because the promise was always about a man, a specific man, the man, and he was everything we'd been waiting for. Closing, chapter 5.